Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to see so many people here tonight, and I'd like to thank you for coming out for this, what I hope will be a very interesting and informative evening. Our guest this evening is North Ayrshire's very own Nicola Sturgeon, who of course was born and brought up in North Ayrshire, and indeed her mother, Joan, is the Provost of North Ayrshire. And of course Nicola is also the SNP's Scotland's Deputy First Minister. And the purpose of tonight's meeting is for Nicola to explain why we think an independent Scotland will lead to a more prosperous future for all of us. So what will happen is Nicola will speak for 10 minutes or so, and then after that we'll throw it open to yourselves, because it's an evening where you can ask and have your questions answered by Nicola, and there'll be about 90 minutes for questions, so plenty of time for all of you to ask the questions that I'm sure you're so keen to ask. So without further ado, Nicola.
Thank you very much indeed. Can everybody hear me at the back? Yeah? Okay, if I stray away from the microphone, just give me a shout. I feel very high up here. You all seem very far away. I suppose it makes it harder for you to chuck things at me. It's absolutely great for me to be here. As Kenny said, coming home to Ayrshire is always a real privilege for me. This is the county I grew up in. My family all still live here, and although I've been in Glasgow now for many, many years, Ayrshire will always be home to me, so it's always a real treat for me to get back here. I have to say, looking out on this audience is also fantastic. This is an incredible turnout, and it's fairly typical of the turnouts that we're getting to these meetings in every single part of the country. I'm doing meetings like this and different kinds of meetings pretty much every day and night of the week at the moment, and the audiences that we are attracting to these meetings are incredible. This is an incredible audience. I spoke at a public meeting in Edinburgh a few weeks ago where there was more than 500 folk crowded into the school gym hall, and I think that is absolutely brilliant. Now I'm sure there are people, I hope there are people in the hall tonight who are committed yes voters. I'm sure there are some people who, as things stand right now, until I've persuaded them otherwise, are intending to vote no, and I hope there are a number of undecided people. But you know what? Whether you're yes, no or undecided, this kind of debate is fantastic for the democratic life of our country, and I really hope one of the legacies of the referendum debate that we are having and will have over these next few months is that all of us will have an even greater interest in politics, in democracy, in how our country is governed. So thank you very much for showing the interest to be here this evening. What I'm going to do tonight, as briefly as possible, because I think it's important that we have as much time as possible for you to ask me questions. I'm going to answer all the easy ones, and I'm going to give the difficult ones to Kenny, if that's okay with everybody. But what I want to do tonight is set out the case for Scotland to be a normal, independent country. And I stress that word normal, because we are going through a really exciting debate right now, and I suppose it's quite tempting for us to think or believe that we're the only ones ever to have this debate, but actually nothing could be further from the truth. Since the end of the Second World War, there have been 150 countries in the world that have become independent. I don't know a single one of those countries that thinks they have made some kind of mistake and would like to go back the way. So independence is actually the normal status for countries around the world. So this debate is about whether we want to become a normal, independent country. And tonight I'm going to set out the case for that. It's a case that, for me, comes from the heart. I've argued this for my entire adult life. I believe it with every single fibre of my being. I don't believe it as some kind of end in itself or for its own sake. I believe we should be an independent country because the powers that we will gain by being an independent country will allow us to make this a better place to live. It will make it a better place to live for all of us living here now, but it will also enable us to build a better country for our children and our grandchildren and their children to grow up in. So for me, that's what this is all about. And the case I'm going to make to you tonight basically boils down to three key propositions. Firstly, we can be independent. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Secondly, I think we should be independent. And thirdly, if we want to be in charge of our own future, to be the ones making the decisions that shape the kind of country we live in, then I think we must take this opportunity that we'll have on the 18th of September to vote yes and become an independent country. Let me start with the can. You will often hear those on the other side of this debate throw all sorts of doubt and uncertainty into whether or not Scotland's got what it takes to be independent. Now, they'll tell you they don't question our ability to be independent, but then everything else that they say will seem to be doing just that. Well, let me just give you a few facts about the country we live in right now. If we were an independent country today, we would be the 14th richest country in the OECD. That's the club of the richest countries in the world. We'd be the 14th richest country in the world. The UK would be number 18. So we'd be higher up that league table than the UK would be. And most of the countries above us in that league table are other small independent countries with populations roughly similar to or even smaller than we are. Countries like Norway, Denmark, Finland. 14th richest country in the world. That's the first fact I want you to remember this evening. Secondly, if you go back every single one of the past 33 years, that's almost, not quite, but almost as long as I've been alive. In each and every one of these years, we in Scotland, per head of population, have generated more tax than the UK as a whole. So the next time you hear somebody on the other side of this debate saying, you know what, Scotland can't be independent because public spending in Scotland is higher than it is in the UK. Well, that's right, because there are some very good reasons for that. But remember what I've just told you. Public spending may be higher, but we generate more tax. We're not subsidised in any way, shape or form. Scotland can more than stand on our own 2 feet. Then you'll hear people on the other side of the debate saying, but it's all down to oil. Well, we must be the only country in the world where we treat vast oil revenues and resources as some kind of handicap and burden. But again, don't let anybody kid you on that our wealth as a country, our economic viability as a country is all down to oil. If you take all of our North Sea oil and gas resources out of the equation completely, then our economy per head of population is roughly the same as the UK's. When you add oil and gas in, and we should add it in because it is a massive bonus, then our economy is something like 20% bigger than the UK's. We've got a strong economy, we've got a diverse economy, we've got some world-class universities, we've got a thriving food and drink industry, manufacturing, engineering, life sciences, as well as oil and gas. We have a number of economic strengths and attributes that make this a very, very strong country economically. There was a report published recently by a credit rating agency, one of these international agencies that determine the creditworthiness of countries around the world. Now, I don't often quote credit rating agencies, but this one looked at Scotland. It wasn't a full credit rating analysis, but they looked at Scotland and they said, even without North Sea oil and gas, an independent Scotland would qualify for their highest economic assessment. So we can be independent. We are one of the world's richest countries. Don't let anybody, whether you end up voting yes or no, please do not let it be because you don't think Scotland is wealthy enough to be an independent country. The big question at the heart of this debate is not whether we can be independent. It's not whether we're wealthy enough to be independent. For me, the big question at the heart of this debate is why more of us in this rich country of ours don't share in the enormous wealth that we have. And that takes me on to the second point I want to make. We should be independent because, as is the case in your personal life, as is the case if you run a business, the decisions that determine your future are always best taken by those who have the biggest stake in those decisions. We're going to make a better fist of our country if those of us who live and work here get to take the decisions that determine whether we're successful or not. And we've proven that through the Scottish Parliament. We've had a devolved Parliament in Edinburgh for 14, 15 years now. And I'm pretty sure that not everybody in this hall will agree with every single decision the Scottish Parliament has taken in those 15 years. I don't agree with every decision the Scottish Parliament has taken. But by having the power to make decisions on things like health, on education, on justice, we've been able to take decisions that are in line with the values and the priorities of people in Scotland. I was Health Secretary for 5 years, and because we are effectively already independent when it comes to running our health service, we've been able to protect our health service from the privatisation that is happening to the health service in England. Because we have decision-making power on education, we still in Scotland, I am very proud to say, have a situation where you don't have to pay £9,000 tuition fees to go to university. Because we are responsible for justice, we've got 1,000 extra police officers on the street. So my argument is if we can take those decisions on health, on education, on justice, then why on earth can't we take decisions about our economy, our welfare system, our defence as a country? Because right now, we can't take decisions to give our businesses a competitive edge, to allow them to compete with the pool of gravity that exists towards London and the South East. We can't take decisions to protect our welfare state. Instead, we are standing on the sidelines while the Tories impose a bedroom tax and dismantle the very foundations of the welfare state that so many of us cherish so much. We can't take decisions about how we are defended as a country, so we have to stand by and watch while Westminster politicians decide to spend £100 billion of our money putting new Trident nuclear missiles on the River Clyde, money that should be spent on providing childcare and a better future for the children of this country. So that's why we should be independent, to give ourselves the ability to take the decisions that we want to take on all of these issues, not just some of them. And the reason we must be independent, in my view, is that it means we no longer have the situations that we also often have right now of being governed from Westminster by governments we don't vote for. You know, I'm almost 44 years old. That's the point at which you're meant to say you are not. Okay, thank you. I'll do that again. I'm almost 44 years old. There's not once, thank you, sir, not once in my entire life have a majority of people in Scotland voted Tory, or have the Tories won a majority of seats in Scotland. Never have the Tories won an election in my lifetime, and yet for more than half my life we've had a Tory Prime Minister. That just doesn't make any democratic sense. Now, I'm sure there's people in this room that didn't vote SNP at the last election, and if there are, Kenny will find you and sort you out later on. But the SNP won the election. We won it fair and square. The Tories at Westminster didn't win the election in Scotland. They lost the election, and they've lost the elections on every occasion that I've been alive. That's not democratic. Independence means that we get the governments we vote for, governments that will do what we want to do, that will act in line with our values and priorities. So that's the reason I believe we should be independent. We can afford to be independent. We can more than afford to be independent. We should be independent because it allows us to set our own priorities, and we must be independent to stop the situation, prevent the situation of sitting on the sidelines while others do things that we don't agree with. Before I finish and open up to questions, I just want to say a word or two about the other side of this debate, about the arguments you'll be hearing from the No campaign. I'm going to say something that might seem a bit strange coming from somebody who's spent a lifetime arguing for Scotland to be independent. But I've always thought there is a case to be made for the Union. It's not a case that I believe stands up to scrutiny. I've always believed that the case for independence is better, stronger, more compelling. But nevertheless, there was a case to be made for the Union. But the No campaign is not making it. In fact, I'd go further than that and say they are destroying, through the tactics they're deploying, the very foundation of the case, the positive case for the union, because they've ripped up any notion that we have an equal partnership. You listen to what the No campaign are saying, and it goes something like this. You have to, if you vote for independence, take on your share of the debt of the United Kingdom, but you won't be entitled to any of the assets of the United Kingdom, assets that we have contributed to, built up and paid for in the same way as people in any other part of the UK. If we vote no, they'll be nice to us and allow us to benefit, but if we vote yes, then they'll decide what we get. That completely rips up the notion of the UK as an equal partnership. And why would anybody vote for a partnership that is so manifestly, as they put it, unequal? So the No campaign is based on fears, it's based on smears, it is designed to make you frightened. We've got Lord George Robertson, the former Defence Secretary and Secretary-General of NATO today, saying that independence for Scotland would be cataclysmic, even by the standards of the No campaign. That is a bit OTT. I would ask you to think about this. I don't know if any of you read The Guardian a couple of weeks ago, when an unnamed UK minister on the issue of the currency, which of course we're told by the UK government officially Scotland wouldn't get to keep our pound, and they tell us we wouldn't get to keep it. Well, an unnamed minister said that's not the case. There would, of course, be a currency union. And he was caught, I'm saying he, it might have been a she, we don't know, but whoever that was caught telling the truth. Of course there'll be a currency union, because if Scotland votes yes, then what you will have is not an independent Scotland and the government of the UK at daggers drawn. You will have two independent countries with a shared interest in working together constructively. Shared currency suits the interests of the UK as much as it does an independent Scotland. Similarly, you hear we won't be allowed into the European Union. Nonsense. The interests of the European Union as a whole means that its biggest oil producer would have a place right at the heart of it. So I ask you, as you make up your mind, to apply a lot of scrutiny to the arguments of the Yes campaign, but also apply a fair bit of scrutiny to the arguments of the No campaign, and come to a decision that's based on rational common sense. And my last point is this. However you choose to vote, my plea to you would be, don't do it out of fear. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity we have in this country to decide what kind of future we want for our children and our grandchildren. So when you're thinking about how to vote, cast your mind forward, not to the 18th of September, but to the 19th of September. When you wake up in the morning of the 19th of September, what's going to make you feel more optimistic about the future of this country? Is it knowing that with the eyes of the world on us, we have had this debate but decided just to keep things as they are, to let Westminster stay in charge? Or will it be knowing that we've taken control of our own future, that we've put ourselves in the driving seat of our own destiny, that we've given ourselves the chance to build the more prosperous, fairer, confident country that I believe Scotland can be? So for all these reasons, I would ask you to vote yes on the 18th of September. I don't believe a single one of us will ever, ever regret it. Thank you very much.
Okay, folks, I'm going to try and speak without the mic. It suits me a lot better. I have to say, I thought that was a very confident speech from Nicola. I thought, being an A United supporter, I should have been intimidated by the large crowd here.
Black and white.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to take questions from the floor. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take them in 3 questions at a time. So if people can put their hands up, I'll take you in sequence, and then we'll pass over those questions to Nicola, and she'll ask them in turn. So who wants to be first? The gentleman at the back there. Yes, sir. There'll be a roving mic. You just hold on for a few seconds.
Thank you. This isn't so much about a question that I say to you, but I would like to just make a general point to actually everyone here today. When you, I'm sure a lot of you saw George Osborne and Ed Ball saying, if Scotland becomes independent, you can't have a pound. But do any of you really believe if in England there was an attitude where a lot of people wanted independence, that they too would at all suggest, oh no, if you go independent in England, you cannot keep the pound? So I think that just proves that we don't have an equal stake. It's not an equal partnership. And I think we should all vote for independence in September.
Okay, thanks very much. I agree with that, but remember we're trying to put questions to Nicola here. Who's next? Yes, the lady there.
Thank you. Every day, Nicola, we hear in the press about all the businesses that are going to leave Scotland, that we're not going to have a currency union, and Scotland's portrayed as some kind of economic wasteland that's going to happen post-independence. For me, it's scaremongering tactics. I truly believe we can stand on our own 2 feet. But the question I would like to ask is, when we wake up on the 19th of September, what's going to be the government's first priorities on the move towards independence?
Excellent, thank you very much. I'll take one more before I pass over to Nicola. Gentleman there, third row.
I've got to disagree with Nicola. I've been voting out of fear, because I remember what happened in the 80s after the Assembly. Vote went wrong and Thatcher took control of Scotland. So I'll be voting out of yes out of fear. What could happen if we vote no?
Fair enough.
Thank you. Okay, Nicola, the first question was George Osborne in terms of the pound, whether or not it is a bluff or not, and what the Scottish Government's first priority would be from the 19th September onwards. And the third question is, what about the fear of what no will do to Scotland?
Okay. I appreciate it wasn't a question, but I'll treat it as if it was a question anyway. On the pound, I said in my opening remarks, it's as much our pound as it is the pound of anybody across the UK. The Bank of England was founded by a Scot. The Bank of England is a shared UK asset. But what I'm asking you to do is to apply some common sense. Don't just take my word for the fact that Osborne is bluffing, although believe me, he is, and one of his own ministers blew the gaff in The Guardian, as I indicated earlier on. If there wasn't a shared currency, the costs and the implications for the rest of the UK would be significant. Scotland is the second biggest export market for the rest of the UK after the United States of America. If English businesses had to change currency in order to export their goods into Scotland, it would cost English businesses something like £500 million every single year. Is George Osborne really going to look his own businessmen and women in the eye and explain to them why he's going to effectively tax them to the tune of £500 million a year? I don't think so. Secondly, if we stay in a currency union, the export value of North Sea oil and gas and all of our other exports counts towards the UK's balance of payments. If you take all of that out, which would happen if there wasn't a currency union, the trade deficit of the rest of the UK would increase. And thirdly, the third big motivation, if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer, is that if we have a situation where Scotland doesn't get to share in any of the UK's assets, then presumably, and it's not the position I want us to be in, presumably we don't take a share of the liabilities either, because these things go hand in hand. And if Scotland wasn't to take a fair share of the UK debt run up by successive Westminster Chancellors, then the additional debt that the rest of the UK government would have to shoulder, the servicing of that debt would be equivalent to putting a penny on income tax for every taxpayer in England. So a currency union, yes, it makes sense for Scotland, but it makes overwhelming sense for the rest of the UK as well. And once we get out of the heat of the campaign and into common sense negotiations, that common sense will come to the fore as the campaign rhetoric subsides. On the second point, you asked me about, or you referred to businesses, first of all. I'd make just a couple of points about that. I don't deny the right of any business to have its say and to speak up. Many businesses have got regulatory obligations to their shareholders and to the markets where they have to report on risk, and I put risks in inverted commas. So I understand the obligations that businesses are under. I would simply make this point. Many of the businesses we're hearing now warning about the risks of independence are exactly the same businesses who, before the devolution referendum, or in some cases before both of the devolution referendums, were saying exactly the same things about the risks of devolution. And the fears that were expressed then did not materialise, and the fears that they are expressing now will not materialise. So Standard Life, who incidentally, although they've been reported as saying they would leave Scotland the minute we vote yes, actually said nothing of the sort. But Standard Life, just as it expressed concerns about devolution, but is still here and doing well, will still be here after Scotland votes for independence as well. And in terms of the priorities, if we, as I hope we do, get a yes vote on the 18th of September, then we will go into negotiations with the UK government. We've made very clear that although as the elected Scottish government we would lead those negotiations, we would take a Team Scotland approach to that. You know, as soon as the campaign is over, there is no yes and no side anymore. There is only Scotland's side. And we would look to involve as many people as possible in that process. Our priorities would be to secure a fair division of assets and liabilities, to make sure that we're prioritising continued joint working where that is in the interests of Scotland and the rest of the UK, and making sure that we make the transition to an independent country. We see Independence Day as the 24th of March 2016. We make that transition in a constructive and friendly way, because we will continue to share an island with England, and Wales will continue to be a part of the British Isles, and those relationships will continue to matter. But Scotland will become an independent country, able to pursue its own priorities, which is, after all, what it's all about. And so I'm an optimist when it comes to my politics. I like to think about what we can do. So I will vote yes out of optimism, hope and belief in the country. And I hope everybody does that, because I think if people do that, then there is only one way to vote, and that is yes. But you're right to say there are consequences to voting no. And one of those consequences is that a few months after the referendum, we could find ourselves, as we have done so often in the past, lumbered with another Tory government that we didn't vote for. I don't want that for the future of the country. And the only way to ensure that we don't get that is to take our future into our own hands through a yes vote. But I want us to do it confidently and optimistically.
Thanks, Nicola. Well, hopefully you've warmed up a wee bit now, and there's a few more people who were a bit reticent at first. Want to come forward? Gentleman in the front row. Yourself? In the corner, yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I don't need a microphone. Can you hear me?
Again, I'll be taking 3 questions.
Right, no bother. It's a kind of observation, but as a question, it's quite a hard question to answer.
Kenny will do it.
Right, okay. And to use the phrase of the moment, it's quite a cataclysmic question. I know, how sad. My area of work for the last 15 years has been in the alienated 20% of this country. One of the greatest speeches ever given was Jimmy Reid's 1971 address to Glasgow University when he became a rector. Since 2010, and I'm like you, Nicola, I've never voted for any of the governments, and I'm slightly older than you.
Slightly?
Never. Right?
Thanks.
I've never voted for these. Since 2010, the people that I've worked with, who have been people with addiction problems, mental health problems, and the neat group, 16 to 20-year-old, right, it has been cataclysmic in what I'm seeing. Now, I'm pretty certain in this room that I could ask any person in here if they know a young person who is really struggling to get work now. And I'm pretty certain a lot of people would know that. But coming here tonight, I like to deal in facts. And I love what you said about a politician getting caught telling the truth. So I'm going to give you a wee bit of truth tonight.
Well, hold on a second. I realise we've only got another hour. There's a lot of people asking questions. I need pressure to answer questions so we can give other people a chance.
The Child Poverty League, the top poverty in the country, USA second top, UK equal 4th. And UK is 15.5% of people in poverty. Norway, Finland and Denmark are 3.4, 2.8 and 2.4. The hard question to ask is, how quickly, when we become an independent Scotland, can we get to the levels of statistics? Because that's an absolute scandal. And finally, sorry to hog the room, I just also seen a fact today. Since 2010, the Champagne Bill in the House of Commons has went up by 57%. Need I say more?
Indeed. Okay, there was another question. Most of the questions seem to come from this side. Gentleman in the third row there with beard. Yep. How many gentlemen in that row with a beard? It's only yourself, sir. Yeah. Oh, sorry, there is two guys with beards in the side.
Thank you. Can I first say thank you very much for your eloquent and informative and indeed charming speech. It's clear you could charm the birds off the trees.
I sense a bot coming.
Sense a stinging tails.
I have a little bit of a problem with the informative part. If it's all as good as you say, why is there any resistance in Scotland at all to this? I ask myself that question. Now, we've heard all the scaremongering from England, from the No campaign. We understand all of that. But there is, of course, a flip side to every coin. So I'd like to ask you what you really think as the downside of going independent.
Okay.
Okay, and I'll take one from over this side. The lady there, towards the back. Yes, with her hand up. That's yourself. Hey, anyway, you need the exercise.
Hello. I'm just keen to ask a question about micro industries and how, under an independent Scotland, those businesses and organisations could benefit. One of the things that I find interesting in the white paper is that there's not a huge amount of reference to the arts and music and recognition to what that does in terms of export for the Scottish economy. And I'm interested to find out a wee bit more about that. I understand that it's maybe not something you can answer on the spot, but it strikes me that under a recession, micro businesses and the self-employed could do with more investment than we currently are getting. And under an independent Scotland, is that something that you can tell us would be a definite guarantee? Also, the tax benefits that musicians get in Ireland, i.e. Tax benefits that encourage the arts, also the dance sector, technology and sectors and industries, and the tax benefits that they get within Ireland, is that something that would be considered under an independent Scotland?
Okay, thank you for that. So the three questions, Nicola, are
okay.
How soon can we get to Scandinavian levels of low poverty? The second question is, why is there any resistance to independence, and what is the downside? I have to say that is a difficult one to answer because I'm not really, I don't really see it, but that's obviously because of where I am. So that will maybe exercise you a wee bit. And the next one is, how would independence benefit micro industries, in particular the arts, and would Scotland, under the SNP, I imagine, because other parties have different policies, of course, would they have a tax benefit to those involved in the arts?
Okay, thank you very much. I'll take them in the order they were asked. You mentioned Jimmy Reid in your question to me, and you're right, I agree with you. I think the speech Jimmy Reid gave in his installation as Rector of Glasgow University is probably the finest speech in modern Scottish political history. Jimmy Reid would have been voting yes if he was alive today, and for me that's quite a powerful statement. You also mentioned the word of the day, cataclysmic. For me, looking ahead, the real cataclysm that we're faced with as a country is the cataclysm of growing poverty in this country. We know right now, and this is not my statistic, this is a statistic that comes from the Child Poverty Action Group, that if we stay on the Westminster path we are on, and the policies that are proposed by the Tories, largely acquiesced to by Labour, are implemented, then by the year 2020, there will be 100,000 more children in Scotland living in poverty than is the case today. And today there are too many. There are 150,000 kids already living in poverty, but that's been coming down. If we stay on the path we're on, that will go up perhaps by as much as 100,000. I just can't square that with my conscience. Now, you asked me how long does it take to fix that, and I'm not going to stand here and tell you it will be done by the snap of my fingers or by the wave of a magic wand. Independence is not a magic wand. You can hold as many powers as you want in your hands, but if you don't use them properly, they won't fix anything. So getting the powers is the first stage, and then using them properly is what we need to do. It will take time. You can't cure poverty overnight. But the first thing you do is to stop doing the things that is making it worse. So we stop doing the things that are being done right now by the Tories that are pushing more people into poverty. And then we look at how we devise policies, things that the Scandinavian countries have already done that lift people out of poverty. One of our big proposals in the white paper is to transform childcare, giving young people the best start in life, but also enabling parents, women in particular, to get back into work. These are the kind of policies that will allow us to eradicate the poverty that is a blight on our country. And so it will take time. I'm not going to stand here and say it will be a year or 2 years or 5 years, but the sooner we start, the sooner we're going to get there. And I mentioned earlier on the statistic about Scotland being the 14th richest country in the world. And I said that many of the countries above us were small, independent countries. It's the small countries that are above us in that league table that, as you rightly say, are also the most equal countries, the fairer countries. So we know it can be done. We know it can be done. What we lack are the powers to do it and the political will to do it. So if we get the powers and we combine it with the political will, we can do it. And for me, if you're asking what my support for independence all boils down to, it is that. It's to create a country where all of our children and young people get the ability, get the opportunity to follow their dreams and reach their full potential. That, for me, is the big prize. Sir, you asked if it was all as good as I'm saying it is, why is there resistance? Well, the first thing I want to say, and it follows on from my answer to the gentleman here, I don't stand before you and say that an independent Scotland will be a land of milk and honey where the streets are paved with gold and will never have any challenges or problems. Every country in the world has challenges, it has problems, it hits rough times. My argument is that you are always better to be navigating your way through these challenges if you're in control of the levers that allow you to choose which direction to go in. Why is there resistance when I think it would be much better than the situation we're in just now? Well, as a country, we've spent an awful long number of years being told we're too wee and too poor and probably a bit too stupid to be independent. And there is a confidence problem. People are susceptible to the fears and the smears. What we need to do is take our confidence in both hands and decide that we want to do things differently. And there's a question that it's sometimes useful to pose to people. If we were too small and too poor and too stupid, if we were the economic, I'm not saying anybody uses this language, I'm going to use it, basket case, if we were the subsidy junkies that some of our opponents try to imply that we are, then don't you think Westminster might have offloaded us by now? We'd probably have been privatised before now. So ask yourself that question. And what's the downside? Well, I get asked this question quite a lot, and Kenny's right, it is when you believe in something, not because it will be perfect, but because it is the best way to be independent and in charge of your own affairs, it can be difficult to see the downside. But the downside, I suppose, if I have to pick one, is that we don't have anybody else to blame anymore. One of the things that frustrates me about Scotland, and I'm as guilty, before anybody says, I'm as guilty of it as anybody, is this tendency to blame everything that's wrong with our country on London. If we're independent, we can't do that anymore. We're accountable, we're responsible, we're in charge of our own future. So the downside is we've got nobody else to blame, but in my view, that's also the biggest upside. Your question about the arts and culture, I'm genuinely disappointed if you think the support for arts and culture doesn't shine through the white paper, and I'll certainly take that away and we'll reflect on that, because I believe passionately that the arts and culture are not just vital to the health and well-being and sense of identity and confidence of any country, they're also, certainly true in Scotland's case, important economically in terms of the export value and what they contribute to our economy domestically. You asked a question about tax breaks. We have, in past manifestos, made clear that we do see a case for tax breaks for artists in order that they can then have the freedom and the ability to do what they do and create great things. We've not got the power to do that right now, so it would be one option we would have with the full economic powers of an independent Scotland. I have to say, in my experience, it divides opinion amongst artists. I was speaking a couple of weeks ago to, she will remain nameless because it was a private conversation, but to one of Scotland's leading writers, and she said she would always have been very against that when she was, coming into her career. So it divides opinions, but it's something we've always said we think has a part to play. In terms of support for micro businesses, I'm happy to take your details at the end and I can maybe send you more information on this. I mean, we've got a lot of powers already that allow us to support businesses of all sizes. We don't have enough powers. We've, as you know, been very deliberate in Scottish Government policy in supporting small businesses through things like our small business bonus. We are very supportive of entrepreneurs, of people trying to set up businesses. So support for our very smallest businesses is something that we think is very important. We can do a lot of that just now, which is what I'm happy to send you some detail on. But having that full array of economic powers gives you much more freedom and flexibility to look at how you grow your economy, how you, something I think is very important, coming after the financial and economic difficulty we've just been through, is to rebalance our economy. And our smallest businesses are absolutely vital to the overall health of the economy that we have.
Thanks, Nicola. Gentleman at the front.
How would the Scottish Government deal with the plight of PD lenders and food banks? I think that's sorry, I'll start again. How would the Scottish country rich, though you say it is, how would that deal with the plight of PD lenders and food banks?
Okay, thank you. Yes, the gentleman just 2 seats away.
A couple of quick questions. We've just seen recently there's 39,000 people going to be required for the oil and gas industry within the next 2 years. Is there any plans to actually get some of the young people, like through apprenticeships and stuff like that? And another one, I work in Aberdeen and I work in Shetland quite a lot in the offshore support. And I see the wealth that there is in Aberdeen. Anybody who's been there will know that. Is there any plans to rebalance that a wee bit and bring it maybe towards the west coast a wee bit, and give everybody else a try?
The gentleman there, over you're faster than anyone else, sir.
My point is about the Scotland Independent, about the HM forces for Scotland being protected, because I've just left the army myself, and it's really hard for ex-forces for seeking work and adjusting to civilian life. And I just wonder what's Scotland be like with an independent?
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, folks, first question is what would we do about payday lenders in independent Scotland? The second one is about the oil and gas industry, the 39,000 jobs announced last week. They know that it maybe get as many headlines as it should have done. And the rebalancing of that in terms of Scotland, so many of the jobs in the North East, what about Ayrshire and other areas? And the third question is HM forces. What would our position be in terms of the armed forces and the support for former forces personnel?
Okay, on the question about PD lenders and food banks, I'll take them separately. My answer will apply in some respects to both of them, but payday lenders need properly regulated and legislated for so that they can't rip people off the way that they too often get away with doing just now. Food banks, and my answer here I suppose will apply to payday lenders, but we have to deal with the underlying reasons why people are ending up reliant on food banks and payday lenders. Let me give you a statistic that horrifies me, and it should horrify everybody in the country that is the 14th richest country in the world. In 2010, the Trussell Trust, which is one of the biggest food bank providers in the country, helped just over 4,000 people. In 2013, that had gone up to more than 50,000 people. And when you take all of the food bank providers in Scotland together, there was about 80,000 people relying on food banks at some time or another. There's a food bank in Glasgow that has started putting nappies into their emergency parcels. You know, I could greet when I think about that. In our rich country, there are parents who can't afford nappies or food for their babies and they're having to rely on food banks. And there is a direct relationship, do not let anybody tell you otherwise, between the welfare cuts that are being imposed by the Westminster government and the fact that more and more people are having to go to food banks to feed themselves. And don't let the Tories kid you on that the welfare cuts are all about the so-called scroungers, the folk who don't work and don't want to work. We all want to see folk working. I don't want to see anybody relying on benefits when they are able and fit to work. But the biggest impact of the Tory welfare cuts right now are falling on people who are working but earning low wages. They're the people who are paying the price, and that's why we've got so many people relying on food banks and payday lenders. And until we get the powers to deal with the underlying causes of that, we're always going to be trying to deal with the symptoms. So that's how we need to do that for the long term. Question about oil and gas is a very, very good one. I mean, it must strike everybody just now. I hope it strikes everybody of the fact that so often you wake up to headlines these days, which is one UK government minister or no campaigner or another saying the oil's running out and Scotland would be too dependent on oil. Oil, God, it's a burden. And then you get all these reports saying there's more oil still to be extracted than has been extracted already. You know, there's 39,000 jobs in the North Sea oil and gas industry. You get David Cameron, oil and gas, fantastic resource. It's a resource for the UK, it's a big burden for an independent Scotland. Oil and gas, exactly. Exactly. I think they've had their share of the oil and gas. It's time for us to get ours. Oil and gas is a massive resource for this country. The big challenge for us, the big question for us, we're about halfway through the oil and gas, probably, roughly. There's still more in value to come than has been taken out, although it gets harder to get it the longer you go on. The big question for us, are we going to allow the mistake of the last 40 years to be repeated? You know, Norway has got an oil fund worth about £500 billion. If it was divvied up, which it's not going to be, to every Norwegian would be a millionaire. What have we got to show for North Sea oil and gas? Well, we've got a share of the £1.5 trillion of UK debt. Well, we can't turn the clock back, but we can decide that we're not going to let that happen again. We can set up our own oil fund and make sure that we don't become the only country in the world that produces oil that has got nothing to show future generations for that. That would be an outrage if we let that happen for the next 40 years in the way it has happened in the last 40 years. Your question was specifically about Aberdeen. There is massive need for skills in Aberdeen, which if we get our act together and do it properly, is a big benefit for all parts of the country. We are already, as a government, working very hard to make sure that we have a strong, and we do have a strong apprenticeship programme, that we're working in Aberdeen and around Aberdeen to make sure the skills that the industry needs for the future are there. And if we play our cards right, that is a benefit not just to Aberdeen and the surrounding areas, but to every single part of the country, and that's what we should do.
I think Nicola Louise's question was how can more of Scotland benefit directly from the oils? For example, what we don't want is a situation whereby Aberdeen sucks all the people and investment into Aberdeenshire, just as in the UK a lot of it goes to London, but there's a wee bit more spread in terms of the actual companies that are able to exploit the North Sea in Ayrshire and other parts of Scotland. That's really what I think is.
Who do you think you are, by the way, Jeremy Paxman?
I don't want you to be one of these politicians who tries to take on his swear the question, that's all.
What's that?
Just looking out for your interest.
Is it more specific apprenticeship programme for the oil and gas industry?
Yeah, no, I take the point. We've got to make sure. I mean, one of the big arguments for independence is to allow us to compete more with London and the South East. So we need to make sure other parts of Scotland are competing with, as well as supporting the booming industries of Aberdeen, principally because of North Sea oil and gas. But if you take the renewables industry, for example, you know, what didn't happen in the earlier part of the renewables industry is happening now. So more of the manufacturing jobs are here in Scotland, and they're not all up in the north of Scotland. If we, again, play our cards right, and there's some uncertainty in the renewables industry just now, not because of independence, but because of UK government reforms, those jobs will benefit Glasgow, the west of Scotland, and other parts of Scotland. So we've got to make sure that the supply chain, the investment that supports the industry in the northeast is shared across the country, and you know that's absolutely important for all parts of Scotland, particularly. It won't surprise you to hear being a West of Scotland girl for the West of Scotland. And of course, if we then discover oil off the West of Scotland, we'll all be laughing and we'll be rich as anything. The third question was what?
The third question is about
forces
and support for
the debate around defence is one of these debates where, you know, it makes me quite angry sometimes at some of the stuff I hear. We're in a situation just now, we're over, I can't remember the precise statistics, but over the last few years, we've had active servicemen and women made redundant, sometimes while they're still on the front line in Afghanistan. We've seen bases closing in Scotland. We're seeing cuts, quite severe cuts, to conventional defence forces in Scotland. All the time, we're ploughing massive resources into nuclear weapons that, pray to God, will never ever be used and don't serve any useful purpose. Independence gives us the chance to have conventional forces that are suitable for our country's needs, that will defend our national interests and allow us appropriately to play our part in the wider world. We've set out very clear plans in the white paper that would support 15,000 troops across the 3 services, 5,000 reservists. We've made very clear what we see as the defence estate in Scotland and the bases and the infrastructure that would be needed to support that. And we're also very strong and very clear about the support we owe as a country to veterans, to ex-members of the forces and to their families. And again, we've already have the ability to do a lot of stuff here, and we've got a programme to make sure that veterans get proper access to housing, to employment support. I'm offering, if you give me your details at the end, I'll send you our veterans strategy, which is all about making sure that people coming out of the forces have the support that they deserve and are entitled to.
Yes, and our Veterans Minister, Keith Brown, is himself a veteran of the forces, a former Royal Marine Commando. Right, I'm going to take some more questions. The gentleman with the beard up the back was first to his hand up. Let's see. No? Yes.
Otherwise, I keep my whopper. But once we get independence, right, England's going to be left with a deficit of revenue. Once they go down the tubes, we have to bail them out.
Right. Okay, so the gentleman with the glasses and the white hair.
Being 21 senior.
Sorry, just waiting for Sandra to actually get mobile there.
Yes, my question is that I'm 21 years your senior.
Never.
Therefore,
you can take that whatever way you want it.
Therefore, receiving the state pension. What I'd like to know is what is my pension going to be under Independent Scotland? And for other people in the hall, if they've already, say, accrued 20 or 30 years pension credits, what is their situation? Is the Scottish Government going to guarantee grandfather rights, basically, on pensions?
Okay, interesting question. And the gentleman who's publicly challenged, second row from the back. Yeah, I don't know why you're looking at yourself.
That's a piece of cut. Just a quick point. I'm still undecided myself. Your opening speech, Nicola, you mentioned 1,000 extra police officers as one of your selling points. We in the Garnet Valley have had our police resources reduced, and the one station that's remaining open, the others have been cutting that as well. But my main point is, what does the Scottish Independent Government plan to do with the deficit of the removal of Trident as far as jobs and economy for the local communities?
Okay then, folks, first question is, if Scotland becomes so very prosperous post-independence, will we have to bail out England? Second, what will pension be in an independent Scotland and what guarantees will there be? And the third question is, there's pressure on police resources in the Garnet Valley, and what will we do to replace the jobs lost when Trident closes?
Okay, I don't think England will have to bail out Scotland or vice versa. England's in deficit, the UK, sorry, is in deficit, and if Scotland was independent, we'd be in deficit, and England... Well, I think you can safely say that the entire UK is in deficit, as in most of the world is in deficit, and we all have to work to get deficits down. The issue I have with the UK government just now is the pace and the scale and who's bearing the brunt of their deficit reduction programme. It's the poorest in our society that is bearing the brunt of that. If Scotland was independent, we'd be in deficit. You know, our deficit is pretty much the same proportionately as the UK's as a whole. So this idea that we'd be more in deficit is rubbish. But we'd have to work to get that down. If Scotland was to have a population share of the UK's debt, our debt to GDP ratio, which is how countries measure whether their debt is sustainable or not, would actually be lower than the UK. So it would be more affordable, more manageable, more sustainable. So, you know, all of this comes back to the fact that Scotland is perfectly financially viable. We need to have control of our own resources, though, if we are to take the decisions that, yes, gets our deficit down, but make sure we're also investing in the things that matter. If you go back to the last 5 years that statistics are available for, we were, if you compare our deficit with the UK's deficit, we would have been, if we'd been independent, we'd have been something like £8 billion relatively better off. That's about £1,600 for every person in Scotland. Now, if we'd been independent, with access to that relative surplus, we could have paid down deficit, we could have invested more, or we could have done a combination of all of these things. The key is to have control of your own finances and your own resources so that you can decide your own priorities. Second question about state pension, which is a question of fundamental importance. The quick answer to your question is yes, we would guarantee all of the accrued pension rights for people in Scotland. Now, one of the obvious points to make that I think is often lost in this debate is that we currently pay for state pensions. You know, there's no money fairy sits in Westminster and provides us all these things for nothing. Our taxes, our national insurance contributions fund these things already, and that would be the case in an independent Scotland. We just cut out the middleman. We wouldn't send the money to London first for it to come back. So we have given a guarantee that we would pay all of the accrued rights and honour all of the accrued rights. Your state pension at the point of independence would be at the same level as it is at that time in the UK. We've given a commitment to the triple lock, which is a guarantee that the pension increases by the greater of earnings or inflation or prices. That's the guarantee we've given. After that, we get the ability to set the pensions policy that suits the country. One of the things I think is really wrong at the moment is that pension age is increasing as rapidly as it is. Now, I'm ashamed of the fact as a country we've got lower life expectancy than the rest of the UK. We work very hard and are working very hard to change that. But while we do have lower life expectancy, is it fair that the pension age in Scotland should just go up and up and up at the same rate as everywhere else, so that people in Scotland actually get less years in retirement enjoying the pension they've paid for than people elsewhere? We should be able to take these decisions ourselves based on our own circumstances, and that would be one of the benefits. But pensions, state pensions, would be guaranteed at the point of independence, and I think that's a really important assurance to give people. Last question, or question in two parts. On the police point, I mean, we set up a single police service for the very express purpose of trying to get resources to the front line so that we didn't have duplication of higher command and all of the bureaucracy that goes with having 8 different police forces. We have protected 1,000 more police officers on the street. There have been changes to some of the hours of police stations, and I know that can be difficult for local communities, and we've got to listen to that. But we want to and have worked very hard to protect police presence in the streets. And the proof of the pudding of this is in Eating. We've got crime rates that, you know, I'm not saying are low enough, but some of the lowest crime rates that we've seen in this country for many a long year. But, you know, I certainly take your point, and, you know, I've had police officers in my constituency that have front counters have had reduced opening times, and I know that can be controversial in local communities. Your second point, though, which I want to get to about Trident and how we secure the jobs, let me just make one point very clearly. We want to get rid of Trident. We don't want to close Faz Lane. Now, you may say, well, how does that work? Because we would turn Faz Lane from being the home to the nuclear deterrent into being, we would create it as the headquarters for the joint forces, and it would be a conventional naval base. And the number of jobs that you would require to service Faz Lane in that form would be not the same jobs necessarily, not with the same skills, but the number of jobs would be broadly equivalent to the number of jobs that are at Faz Lane just now supporting Trident. But that's the key point to keep in mind. We want rid of the nuclear weapons. Faz Lane will continue to be an operating base within our armed forces.
Okay, now about half the people in the hall here are women, but the last asked for questions and hands, it was only men that seemed to put their hands up, or if there's any women that noticed them. So let's have some women. Oh, here's a good few. The lady in the third row there first, and then I'll take you second. Yes, we're just waiting for Sandra to come with the mic.
Hi. To allow Scotland to flourish, you've said that you need the pound in EU membership. Well, that's how I understand what you've said. And you've said that this will be discussed after Scotland wins independence. But this is a massive question. And for me it's difficult because that deserves an answer before we're asked to vote. And at this moment it's all ifs, buts and maybes. And this is not acceptable in order to make an informed decision. We deserve to know all the answers, and when you're making such an important decision in your own life, you always assess all the facts. And the major one is not being answered. And there's still, the boys down there are saying you're not getting it, you're saying we're getting it. So somebody's going to have to give in. And you're in the middle having to make that decision.
I understand.
And we don't have the facts, which isn't acceptable. And to be the same, I think, as Denmark, a different question. It's like Denmark, do they not all pay the same tax? They're all in it together. They're not supposed to pay like 50% tax in order for them to get all the services that they have. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And the lady just a few feet over from you.
Hello, I read a part of your white paper in the finance area, and you've got quite a shopping list there of what you can do, but you've not got a price list or what it's going to cost us.
Okay, thank you. The next question, and the lady just there, actually, in the white.
My question is about the NHS. I know the Scottish Government at the minute have a lot of powers in the NHS, but there's still things that were joined on with the UK as an agenda for change and kind of like national sort of kind of standards. So my first question is for healthcare workers, where would they stand after independence, and would the NHS and Scotland as a whole benefit from independence?
Okay, really interesting questions. First question really was, in terms of the pound in EU membership, who do you believe, who do you trust? A massive question. It's all ifs, buts and maybes. The second question was, there seems to be in the white paper a shopping list, but no price list. And the third one is, what will happen to the NHS and independent Scotland, and how can it be improved, particularly in reference to healthcare workers?
Okay. Your question is fundamental to people, and I understand that. I am giving you the answers to the questions. There will be a currency union and we will be in Europe, but I accept you're hearing people on the other side saying differently to that. Now, I would love us, the yes campaigners and the no campaigners, to say, look, I know we disagree on this, but let's in the interests of giving people certainty, sit down and work these things out. I would love to stand here and say to you, yeah, we've agreed X, Y and Z, because it would make it easier for me to give you the certainty that understandably you're looking for. The No campaign is not going to do that because they're, and I'm not being deliberately critical of them here, I'm just stating a fact. Their campaign depends on you feeling uncertain and scared, so that if you feel uncertain and scared, you'll vote no because you don't think you've got the certainty to vote yes. So they are saying that these things won't happen as part of their campaign tactics. Now, assuming that's going to continue to be their position, what I have to ask you to do, and it's your decision at the end of the day, is to apply common sense. You're an intelligent person. I know from the way you asked your question, you're an intelligent person, and you have to separate the campaign tactics from the common sense of what would be in the interest, not just of us in Scotland, but of the rest of the UK. And I gave you some very, very powerful reasons earlier on why it's not just that it would be mildly inconvenient to the rest of the UK not to be in a currency union. It would be disastrous for the rest of the UK not to be in a currency union. It would damage, deeply damage their own economy. It would put up debt for them. It would probably have a big impact on the value of the pound because of the impact on their trade deficit, all sorts of reasons. So you have to look at this with common sense and say, and this is, I would argue, what we all do in our everyday lives because, you know, certainty is often elusive in much of how we live our lives. You apply common sense and rational thought and you decide what you think is the most likely outcome based on what is common sense. And that's what I'm asking you to do. And I know it is much easier for all of us if there's just a certainty that both sides have agreed to. But remember, it suits the other side for you to think everything is uncertain. And if you haven't read The Guardian from, I think, 2 Saturdays ago, go and look it up online. You know, there is voices within the UK government that are saying privately what they won't say publicly. And this is a direct quote. Of course there would be a currency union. What is said in the campaign will be very different to what is said after the campaign. So,
it's still a fundamental issue that's not down in writing. It's not.
But that's my point. Yeah, but that's. I would love to say. Well, I'm not the barrier to that. Is what I'm saying. Yeah. Yeah, but what I'm saying to you is, the No campaign will never get into that position, because if they said, okay, we'll have this all sorted out before the referendum, their trump card in this campaign would be taken away. So, well, no, it's not. Well, no, it's not, because actually being able to give people certainty.
Hold on, let her answer the question.
I'm trying. You know, I'm standing here in front of you. The No campaign is not. I'm trying to be honest and frank with you. It doesn't suit my position to be in this conversation with you. It would actually suit me much better to be able to say, okay, we disagree with the No campaign, they disagree with us, but in the interest of giving you certainty, we've agreed all of this. I'm asking you to think about why they won't do that, because they want you to keep that feeling of uncertainty in your mind, and I am asking you to apply the common sense that I know you have and say, why, after the event, why would any Chancellor of the Exchequer in a UK government act against the interests of their own economy? It doesn't make any sense. And that's the position. And I know it's difficult, but you know, are we going to allow ourselves to be fooled and bullied by a UK government that is doing it for their own political interests? That's the question we've got to ask ourselves. On the finance question, who asked me? Lady here, sorry, I couldn't see you there. With the greatest of respect, there is a price list in the white paper, and I could probably take it out of my bag and point you to the very page it's on. We set out the early price. Before I go on to answer that, let me just make a preliminary point. You've got to separate out Scotland being independent from who will be the government in an independent Scotland. Now, I'm in the SNP. I want to think that if we're independent, the SNP will be in government, but we might not be. So different parties will have different policies, they'll have different spending priorities, they'll have different proposals around tax. What we do in the White Paper is set out what our early priorities would be. And we also set out what we wouldn't spend money on in order to pay for them. So, you know, we wouldn't spend as much on defence. We wouldn't do a particular tax relief that the Tories are about to do, which discriminates against folk that are not married. So we set out what we wouldn't do. And the other point I would make to you, and again it's a point very much from the SNP perspective, we've been in government, in a devolved parliament, for 7 years now. Every single year we've balanced the books. We can't do anything else, but nevertheless we do it. So everything we decide we want to spend money on, whether it's free education or police on the street or free prescriptions, council tax frees, whatever else it is we've committed to, we have had to find the money to fund that. We have to set our priorities. And that fiscal discipline would have to be applied by any government in an independent Scotland, because it doesn't work otherwise, as the UK governments have demonstrated with all the debt they've managed to run up.
Why is there a £400 billion deficit between 2011 and 2012 in the oil revenue there?
400 billion, I think, that figure.
400 billion, yes.
It can't be 400
it's
billion
not 400
because Scotland's entire income isn't 400 billion. Oil revenue in Scotland is about 5.6 billion in total. So
well,
I think
well, let's take the lady's general point. The figure's not 400 billion, but let's put that point aside. Your general point is, in the most recent accounts in Scotland, oil revenues had fallen. And I'll come on to how you manage oil revenues going up and down in a second. The reason oil revenues had fallen in that year was primarily because there had been record investment in the North Sea. So companies, when they invest, get tax relief on their investment, so the tax revenues they pay are lower. That investment in the North Sea is what will mean we keep extracting oil in years to come, and the revenues will go up again in years to come. But even with that fall in oil revenue, I think it was 4 billion, I think is the figure, even with that fall in oil revenues, that took Scotland's what's called our current account deficit, the gap between what we spend day to day and what we raise, to just pretty much exactly the same level as the UK's. So, you know, if your argument is Scotland can't be independent because we're in deficit, then there's practically no country in the world that should be independent right now, because they're all in deficit. We need to get access to our revenues so that we can use them properly to get our deficit down and invest in our priorities. What most other oil-producing countries do, with two exceptions, the UK and Iraq, are the only two oil-producing countries in the world that don't sensibly manage their oil revenues by having an oil fund that means in the good years you squirrel some of it away, and in the years when oil revenues are lower, you've got something to draw on. That's what we need to do as an independent country to make sure we're properly managing the oil revenues. But, you know, do not let anybody tell you Scotland can afford to be independent. There might be other reasons why you think we shouldn't be independent, but that's not one of them. We're more than capable of doing it. And being independent means we manage our resources better in the future and don't have a situation which we've got now where Westminster governments have spent money for years that they don't have. £1.5 trillion. That's the UK debt right now. We need to get out of that so that we can manage our resources better. The third question, the NHS. Oh, sorry, one very close to my heart. I shouldn't have forgotten that one. Look, we're already about, I would say, 98% independent when it comes to running the health service. You mentioned Agenda for Change. We choose at the moment to kind of coordinate across the UK on Agenda for Change. We don't have to do that. We have the powers already to have a completely separate pay and condition system if we choose to do so. And just recently, of course, the Health Secretary, my successor as Health Secretary, has taken a different view to Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary in England, when it comes to pay of NHS staff. We are honouring the recommendations of the pay review body, unlike the government in Westminster who've decided to chuck them in the bin. So we're already independent there. The things where we're not currently completely in control are things like regulation of some, not all, some health professionals. And it makes sense to have a common regulatory system across the UK because health professionals come from England to Scotland and vice versa to work. We have contracts in place between the Scottish Health Service and the English Health Service for some very specialist treatments, but some people come from England to Scotland and vice versa. But these are contracts, they're not dependent on Scotland being in the UK. When I was Health Secretary and we had swine flu, we had to send a seriously ill woman with swine flu to Sweden for specialist treatment. So there are all sorts of contracts between different countries. The big advantage for us in being independent in health is not that we get lots of policy freedom that we don't have just now, because we have most of that anyway. It's that we don't have a situation where our budgets are affected by cuts to health south of the border. Our budget in the Scottish Government right now is set through, you've probably heard about the Barnett formula. And that means if a government in England cuts health spending in England, which they will do in years to come because they're privatising it, then that has a knock-on effect on our budget and makes it all the more difficult for us to protect our health service. So the big advantage of independence for public services is that we don't have that risk to our funding. We can match the financial freedom with the policy freedom we already have.
Okay, thanks for that, Nicola. Now, time marching on, so I'll take 6 more questions in groups of 3. The gentleman in the middle and the gentleman that we shut at the back will be the first 2. And suddenly all the women have put their hands down. I'm still taking, and I'll take the lady there, so I'm still taking men and women.
There's not been a great deal of cooperation from Westminster with regard to the referendum and Holyrood up to date. Now, if you look abroad at some of the national and political changes, there's been an awful lot of violence that's been created. If you look at the Arab Spring, Syria, Ukraine, you come to our own country. Ireland did not get its independence in a peaceable way. And if you look at the argument that Margaret Thatcher had with the miners, that was pretty violent. Now, what gives you the confidence that after a yes vote, you will get the cooperation of the Westminster Government to negotiate these things that you need?
Okay, thank you very much for that. And the gentleman at the there as well, Sandra, get the mic to him. No, it wasn't yourself, sir, it was the guy with the white collar. Sorry, I didn't actually see you with your hand up.
What it is, being 17 myself, one of the things I want to know is why did you open the vote up to people my age range? Because one thing that seems to be becoming apparent is a lack of to say, people saying that it's not right, basically. So I want you to manage to maybe explain to some of the people in this room that think the same, that we shouldn't have the vote, why you decided that we should.
Okay, thank you very much. And you're going to have to jog to the lady down there. Now, Sandra, come on. Next marching on, come on. Chris.
Thank you. My questions are pretty basic, but very important. And the first one was the income tax. You know, whether income tax rates will stay the same, or whether it will be changed, or what will happen to income tax. And secondly is about state benefits. And most importantly, for those people who are disabled and unable to work, and for older people who are also disabled, a lot of benefits are being cut at the moment. And I think it's quite an important question as to what's going to happen.
Okay, again, excellent questions.
Right,
First
I've got
one
them
is, how do we know that we'll get cooperation from the UK after independence, given some of the issues in other parts of the world? Second question, why did we give the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds? And third question is really in 2 parts. What would income tax rates be, and state benefits?
Okay, so your question about what makes me confident that we'll be able to negotiate sensible positions and some of the things we've been talking about. And I'll come on to that directly in a second, but just a bit of context. One of the things I feel very strongly about, and it's something I think, whatever your opinion on this debate is, we should all in Scotland be really, really proud of, that the process we're engaged in right now is peaceful. There's not been, anybody has had as much as a nosebleed in the long campaign for Scottish independence. it's democratic, and the process of it, if not the debates around it, are consensual. You know, John Kerry, the US Secretary of State, just a few weeks ago, held up the process of the referendum here as the shining example of how these things should be done. I think we should be really proud of that, frankly. And secondly, you know, we're in a heated debate right now, and you can be easily forgiven for looking at the Scottish Government and the UK Government and thinking, my God, these people agree on nothing. And we don't agree on whether or not Scotland should be an independent country. But you know what? There's a lot of cooperation between the Scottish Government and the UK Government on a whole range of different things. I mentioned swine flu earlier on. I was Health Secretary when we had the swine flu pandemic. I was on the phone every day, several times a day, to my counterparts in Westminster, cooperating jointly about how we dealt with that response. There will be examples like that in every single part of government. And there's then the agreement that led to the referendum, the Edinburgh Agreement. Now, that was two governments diametrically opposed in terms of their views on independence. Alex Salmond, David Cameron, who are no the best of pals, in case you haven't noticed, nevertheless coming together and saying, you know what, we disagree and we'll argue our case, but we're going to agree the process by which that should happen. And in that agreement, both sides said we'll respect the outcome. So there is a lot of cooperation. But the reason why I'm confident that these things will be negotiated, I'm not saying there'll be easy negotiations, I'm not saying there will be no difficulties or no challenges, that there won't be some tough negotiation in there. Of course there will be. But the reason why I believe it will be done sensibly and properly is because it is in the interest of all of us. If we were arguing positions that were in the interest of Scotland, but completely against the interests of the rest of the UK, it would be a very different scenario I was putting forward here. But everything I'm arguing that requires negotiation is a position that is in our common interest, whether that's currency union, membership of the European Union, our continued arrangements around our energy supply. These are all positions that are as much in the interest of the rest of the UK as they are in Scotland's. And once we get past the debate and the campaign and the point of decision, you know, democracy is a very powerful thing. We will then see a very different atmosphere, because it won't be two governments fighting a campaign. It will be two governments getting around the table and saying, how do we implement this decision? Tough negotiations, yes, but with a spirit of doing it in the interest of everybody, and that's what makes me confident about it. Second question, why did we give the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds? There are days just now when I look at my 16-year-old nephew and I wonder that myself, but don't tell him I said that. Anthea Dixon, don't tell my mother I said that either. We decided to give the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds because I think it's the right thing to do. I don't know whether 16 and 17-year-olds will be more or less likely to vote for independence. That's not the point. You can get married at 16. You can become a parent at 16. You can sign up to join the army at 16. You can't fight on the front line, but you can sign up to join the army. If you can do all of that, why on earth shouldn't you get a vote to decide the future of your country? I think 16-year-olds should get the right to vote in all elections. So that's the honest and simple answer. Your questions, you're right, basic questions, but very important questions. On income tax, the point to understand about all taxes is, and all laws in fact, at the point we become independent, we inherit all of the laws of the UK until we decide to change them. So all of the tax rates that are in place in the UK at the point we become independent will become the tax rates for Scotland until a democratically elected Scottish Government decides to change those tax rates. There's no reason, just by virtue of Scotland becoming independent, that tax has to go up. It goes back to what I said earlier on. We fund all the services that we get just now. We don't have to put taxes up just to pay for the things we have right now. Future governments in Scotland, just as governments in the UK in the future, will make decisions on tax rates based on the state of the economy and the priorities they want to implement, and those will be for the governments of the day to decide and to implement. But at the point of independence, we inherit the prevailing tax rates until such time as we change them. And in the white paper, we don't propose changes to income tax rates. We make some suggestions, very small number of suggestions, about how we would want to change business tax, for example, if we were the government of the day. One of the big things I think we would have the opportunity to do is to simplify the whole tax system in Scotland. The UK's got one of the most complicated tax systems of any country in the world. That's what makes it so easy for big corporations to get away with not paying the tax they're due. So a simpler, easier tax system that meant folk have to pay the taxes they're due would be one of the things that we would get the chance to do. On benefits, disabled people are one of the groups in our society that are paying the biggest price of the current Westminster government. The transition from disability living allowance to personal independence payments sounds all fine, but it's just about getting disabled folk off of benefits that they're entitled to. We wouldn't go ahead with the personal independence payment rollout. We would put in place a system that was fair for people. Now, I don't depart from the view that if you can work in this life, you should work. There should be no easy ride for folk off the back of taxpayers who do work. But I also believe passionately in the welfare state, the social security system that provides a safety net for people who, whether it's through disability or other bad fortune, can't work. It's the mark of a civilised society. We're losing it in the UK, and an independent Scotland would have the chance to protect it.
Thanks for that, Nicola. I should say, as convener of the Parliament's Finance Committee, that we are actually putting forward the Revenue Scotland and Tax Powers Bill to design a new tax system for Scotland for devolved taxes, and if Scotland becomes independent, the framework will be established so that tax system will already be there come independence. Now I'm going to take three final questions. So let's see, we'll have the gentleman at the back with the glasses and the kind of pale blue shirt. And we'll have the lady actually there with the kind of white thingamabob, and we'll have the gentleman with the rolled up bit of paper. Okay, folks, and apologies to anyone else I wasn't able to take.
I spend a lot of time, particularly on the internet, arguing in favour of independence, and one of the things I think people know nothing about is West Coast oil. Even people in the oil industry don't know anything about it. Now, until we get exploration licences handed out, we don't know what's there, but all the science says there's a huge pool of oil off the west coast of Shetland, and of more interest to this area, there's a huge pool of oil in the Clyde Basin south of Arran. And I think it would be worth Nicola saying a few words on the different approaches of if we get independence and if we don't get independence, and what will happen to that oil. And I'd love a response on Brian Wilson's recent comments in America that the whole world was going to stop drinking whiskey if we vote for independence.
Okay, lady, Sandra, just a wee second until Sandra gets down the mic.
I would just like to ask, when we're living in this utopia that you described Scotland's going to become, if we're going to be, how we're going to be able to afford to create all the jobs for the unemployed youths that we see hanging out the streets, how you're going to continue to pay for the so-called free personal care for the pensioners. The numbers have been up. It's costing government and the country masses amount of money, which we really can't afford, but it's a good publicity stunt to get votes because you can get free personal care. And my other worry is, when you do away with trying, how safe will Scotland be for our next generation coming up north?
Okay, and the gentleman over there with the rolled up leaflet, the kind of white vest, t-shirt. Thanks, Sandra.
Hi, my question is about the UK. It's my understanding that the UK was formed between the Union of the Crowns of Scotland and England. So if we become independent, surely that kind of splits it up a bit. And why should the London government retain the rights in Europe and of the pound when Scotland retains independence?
Okay, thanks very much. Interesting questions there. First one was about Scotland's oil resources. If Nicola could touch on the different approaches that Scotland and the UK would have on that. The second is about how can we afford all these things in an independent Scotland. You know, how would our children and grandchildren be safe without Trident? And the third thing is the United Kingdom won't actually technically be abolished because we'll still have the Queen as head of state. It's the repeal of the Act of Union in 1707 we're talking about. So therefore, how can the UK claim to remain as the sole member state in terms of the EU, etc.?
Okay, forgive me, I'm not going to go into a long exposition of the detail around West Coast oil. Suffice to say, I think one of the big benefits of independence is that we get the opportunity to steward our oil resources as well as properly explore and harness future resources that are as yet unknown in a way that is responsible and in the interests of Scotland. And that includes setting up an oil fund, it includes proper exploration of some of the untapped resources that you referred to, and I think that would be in sharp contrast to the way our oil revenues and resources have been managed by successive Westminster governments, and that applies to possible reserves off the West Coast as well. And for me, it's one of the key issues at the heart of this debate, not the only one, but it's one of them. You know, they say, you know, fool us once, shame on us. Shame on you, fool us twice, shame on us. If we allow the next 40 years of our oil resources to be squandered and mismanaged in the way that the last 40 years have been, then we will have nobody to blame but ourselves, and we'll have to look future generations in the eye and say why we're the only country in the world that's left nothing for them to benefit from our resources. I don't want to be in that position, and I don't think we should allow ourselves to be in that position. I also think I should probably resist commenting on any thing that Brian Wilson has said on anything ever. I think you know, one of the many scare stories that we had from the No campaign was that if we were independent, British embassies would no longer stock whisky. That's quite interesting because, you know, British embassies charge the Scottish Government for stocking whiskies in embassies, so the idea that we get it for nothing is already completely ridiculous. Just one of the many silly scare stories that we should, I think, be prepared to see through. Lady here, I genuinely apologise if I believe in independence, and I think Scotland will be a better country if we're independent. I don't think we'll be utopia. I don't think utopian states exist anywhere. Scotland will have its problems, its challenges. We'll have to balance the books. If we want to do things, we'll have to find the money to pay for them. And you know, I don't pretend otherwise. The specific things you've talked about are interesting, though, because whether or not you agree with these policies, whether it's our youth employment schemes or free personal care for the elderly, these are policies of the Scottish Government right now. We fund them already. Nobody funds them for us. They're examples of things that we have done within a fixed budget. We don't have the power to borrow money. We've had to set our priorities so that we're able to implement those policies. Now, a future government might decide that they've got different priorities, but we have exercised in the devolved government the fiscal discipline that has allowed us to deliver what we think is important. And, you know, at the last election, people thought our priorities were good enough, otherwise they wouldn't have returned us with the majority they did. So that's the important thing. There's no free ride in an independent Scotland. There's no money tree in the corner. We have to earn our wealth, we have to set our priorities, and we have to fund them. But if we're doing that ourselves, we're funding our priorities, not priorities that are set by governments in London that are very often fixed on the needs of London and the South East, and that's the big difference with independence. Your question about Trident, you know, I've always opposed nuclear weapons. I'll make no apology for saying I oppose nuclear weapons in principle. I find the idea of weapons that can wipe out entire swathes of civilization just morally repugnant, and I don't think there's any place for them in any country in the world. But if you think back to the Cold War, at least there was some kind of, I suppose, rational logic. You knew who the weapons were pointed at. I still thought it was wrong, but you knew what they were meant to be deterring. The world we live in today, the threats are international terrorism, rogue states. These are not the kind of threats that nuclear weapons are going to protect you from. Nuclear weapons today, they've never had any moral justification in my view, but they have no military justification in the modern world either. What makes us safe as a country is investment in strong conventional defence forces. And that's what is being compromised in the UK with this quest to invest more and more money on pointless nuclear weapons. So not having Trident and having proper investment in our soldiers, our sailors, our Air Force men and women, that's what will make us safe. And that is a much better use of resources than stupid nuclear weapons. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Of course.
Not necessarily Trident, but I can't get my head around exactly what you're proposing.
Okay.
What will provide the safety for Scotland.
Okay, I'm going to... Okay, I'll do a deal with you. In the interest of time, I've got one copy of the white paper in my bag here. I'm going to give it to you before you leave, and I'm going to point you to the pages. It's set out... Right. Okay. Well, okay, but it sets out, in that case, be fair then, it sets out in some detail at the point of independence, 5 years after independence, 10 years after independence, what the troop numbers would be across the 3 different services. It sets out where they would all be stationed, what bases we would protect. It sets all of that out in some considerable detail. And again, I go back to a point I've made generally tonight. We fund all of that already. We don't get it for free from the UK government. It's funded by your taxes and my taxes, and that will continue to be the case, because I agree with you, strong defences for any country is vital. I just happen to think it's better having strong conventional forces that do that job rather than pointless nuclear weapons that have no use to anybody in the modern world. And the last question, you're right to point to the fact and again, there'll be people who will take a different view to me on this and different view to the SNP. We are not suggesting breaking up the Union of the Crowns. We support the Queen continuing to be head of state in an independent country. It's the political union we want to end so that Scotland becomes politically independent. Now, the UK government claims that it would be what they call the successor state. I think in international law that is debatable. There's no clear, I studied international law, there's no clear right and wrong on that. It's debatable. But they claim that they would be the successor state. But they don't quite go the whole way in claiming that, because their position, and it is a completely incredible position, is that they get to keep all of the assets of the UK, but we get to take the liabilities, or our share of the liabilities. That's not, in anybody's language, a fair way of going about things, nor is it how these things will be dealt with in the event of independence. We'll have a fair sharing of assets and liabilities, and there'll be many things we'll continue to share assets on, because that will make sense across the UK. Look, I think that... Are you taking more questions, or is...
Well, if you want to take more questions, it's up to you. I mean,
if there are more questions, I don't want anybody to leave here tonight thinking they haven't had their questions answered.
I'll take the lady at the back, and then the gentleman at the front, and then I'll take the gentleman here. And then we will call a halt after that, because time is marching on and we'll leave the hall for a certain amount of time.
Nicola, would an SNP government in an independent Scotland give the voters the courtesy and the right to a referendum on whether we wanted to stay in Europe? And I'm speaking as a modern languages teacher, where I've spent 37 years in a teaching career trying to convince children the benefits of doing a modern language to be part of a Europe, and have never seen the benefits develop for these young people. Other people have mentioned tonight the lack of jobs in the area for young people, but Europe was supposed to open many doors and it hasn't. It's been a huge gravy train for bureaucrats.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Sandra, we're down the front here. I know you're up to the challenge. Sorry, I haven't seen. Apologies for that. I'll tell you what, I'll take you as the fourth one, then we'll do 40s and stuff like the wind up. Okay? Can't say fairer than that, eh?
It's been well documented that success on the international sports field has a feel-good factor for the country. My question is, how will you make sure Scotland has that feel-good factor from grassroots level to international sport after the referendum?
You know, we're still in great questions here, actually, you know. And the third person, who was the gentleman at the front there.
How are you going to convince the people of Scotland eventually to realise you have your own destiny? And think about people that in my family who are up here. Obviously I'm not from here originally, but I've been up here for 20 odd years now. I live in Beith, married a nice girl from Beith, everything else, got 2 Scottish sons. Proud to be here tonight to see what's happening here. There's been people over the years who would love to still be alive now to see this. To absolutely appreciate you have the chance to take your own destiny, and I hope that people will do that.
Nicola, can I ask you, what do you think is a reasonable timetable to get rid of it?
Okay, nice straightforward brief question. Sometimes to wait so long you ask it. So, okay, first question is, if the SNP formed the government in Independent Scotland, would there be a referendum on Europe? The second one was, what can we do to give our athletes and other sports people the feel-good factor and encourage sports success? The third one is, really it was a point about this is a great opportunity not to be missed. And the fourth one is, how long would it take to get rid of travel?
Okay, I'm going to answer 1, 2, 4 and then come back to 3 at the end, since it will be the last question I answer. It's not SNP policy to have an in-out referendum on the European Union, so I'll just be honest with you about that. If we're independent, of course, people would have the option to vote for parties who do offer that, and it would be down to how people voted. I think in Scotland, I'm not sure, as on a number of things, I'm not sure what Labour's position is. I think the Tories support an in-out referendum. We think, and I'll come on to some of your specific points, because I agree with some of your specific points, but we think overall it is in Scotland's interest to be in Europe. You know, there are a lot of jobs in Scotland. I appreciate they're not in every part of Scotland, but there are a lot of jobs in Scotland that depend on our place within the European single market, and I think it would be bad for Scotland economically and in a range of other ways to be outside of the European Union. That said, the European Union is not perfect. I think your characterisation of it at least appearing at times to be a gravy train for bureaucrats is an absolutely reasonable thing to say. That is how it appears, and I'm sure the reality at times has been that as well. I think the focus and the priorities of the European Union are often wrong. And one of the reasons I want Scotland to be independent in Europe is so that we can be a voice in there, standing up for our own national interests and arguing for the reforms and the change to the European Union that are necessary. But I think it's better to be in there with your own voice arguing that case than putting yourself on the margins or risking being outside of it, which is what will happen potentially to Scotland if we stay within the UK. So that's the answer on that. Second question was on, who's the guy who asked me the second question? Sports. I mean, I'm not going to throw all of this question into the kind of independence arena, because, you know, we have a sports minister in the Scottish Government. Much of the responsibility for encouraging our sporting athletes and our sporting performance from the grassroots right through to elite level already lies with the Scottish Government, and we are investing heavily just now in elite sports, and hopefully we'll see the benefits of some of that in a couple of months' time at the Commonwealth Games when we're winning medals. But we've also been very, very clear that we've got to get a legacy from the Commonwealth Games, so there's a lot of investment associated with the Commonwealth Games going into community sports hubs, grassroots, coaching across a range of sports. And I think that's really important, because I'm not a huge sports fan myself. As Kenny said, I'm an Ayr United supporter, so clearly I don't support sport. But it's a bit like the question that was asked earlier on about arts and culture. Sport is so integral to our national identity and sense of who we are, and it's really important that we give proper support and proper investment to that. Now, in July, we will compete as Scotland in the Commonwealth Games. I hope we win lots of medals. We're certainly working hard to, the athletes are working hard to make sure that's the case. If we're independent, we might have the chance, we will have the chance to compete in our own right in the Olympic Games as well. And I think for young, up-and-coming Scottish athletes, what more motivation. Not that I'm saying, you know, it would have been fantastic for those who won medals at the London Olympics to do so as part of Team GB. I cheered on all of Team GB in the London Olympics. But the chance to compete as Scotland in the Commonwealth Games and the Olympic Games, I think that would be a fantastic thing for our sportsmen and women now and in the future. Trident is pretty dangerous, in case anybody hasn't noticed that. It has to be removed safely, and we will not do anything that compromises safety in the removal of Trident. But we want it out, and we want it out without delay. It won't stay in Scotland a minute longer than is absolutely necessary if we've got anything to do with it. We've set out in the white paper a timetable that would see Trident go within the first term of an independent Scottish government. CND have done quite a detailed piece of work that says you could get Trident out of Scotland in a couple of years. So it's going, and it's going as quickly as possible, but it will go safely as well, because I think we owe that to everybody who's affected by it. And, sir, are you from Wales?
Yeah.
Yes. Whereabouts?
Never.
I didn't want to assume. I was down in Cardiff last week. Yeah, I was down in Cardiff 2 weeks ago now, making a speech down there, and there's huge interest in Wales. There's huge interest in every part of the world right now about what we're doing. The eyes of the world are literally on us. And again, whether you're yes, no, undecided, that's a great opportunity for us to put Scotland on the map. I really hope we take this opportunity. You know, we might never in our lifetimes get this opportunity again. And I know there are uncertainties. There are big uncertainties if we vote no as well. The question we've got to answer is what gives us the best chance of navigating the uncertainties and taking the right decisions for ourselves and for future generations? Is it leaving those decisions in the hands of Westminster, or is it taking the power to make those decisions into our own hands? Nobody is ever going to make better decisions for Scotland than those of us who live, work here, run businesses here, invest here. And when we wake up on the 19th of September, if we voted no, I think we'll all regret it. Even those who vote no, I think will regret it, because we might not get this opportunity again. This is our chance to put ourselves in the driving seat of our destiny, and to do so entirely peacefully. There are countries across the world would give their eye teeth for the opportunity we've got. For goodness sake, let's not pass up on it.